Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning to you. 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 Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. Good morning to each and every one of you. Love to see those smiling faces on your profile pics. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, Pastor Ben. Good morning, Lady Evelyn. Good morning, Hubby Rock. Good morning. So glad to see each and every one of you. Good morning, Lady Latoya, and each and every one of you who will be coming in to join us. Thank you to those who are also catching the replay. Thank you to those who are watching by whatever gadget you're watching today. If you're watching by Twitter, if you're watching by Facebook, if you're watching by YouTube, all of these different ways that people around the world can view what's going on. I also want to say good morning to those in Antigua, Jamaica, Bahamas, UK. Shout out to those of you all who are watching from around the world. So, we are in our Teachable Tuesday. And for those of you who have been watching by YouTube, I have been going back to my YouTube channel season 3, and I noticed that YouTube has taken down many of my episodes from season 3. Good morning, Lady Andrea. Many of my episodes from season 3 that have to do with Black history, Black money, Black Jesus. Notice a pattern here? So if you've been watching by YouTube, you can go to my Periscope, and I have that on my playlist. If you look at the playlist for Daring Dialogue Season 3, I have the link there where you can go to my Periscope and you can view any of the episodes that seem to be missing from my playlist for Daring Dialogue Season 3. All right? So I just wanted to give you all that heads up that yes, they do come back after my broadcast and they do remove content. And then they send me a nice, deceptive, sweet little email saying, we don't know what happened to your content. We don't know why your video is missing. And I know it's them doing it because I'm not taking them down. All right. It is a shame, but we also need to understand these are some of the reasons why we need our own independent platforms. Right now, the world is run by, most of the digital world is run by YouTube, Facebook, and Facebook owns Instagram. In case you all didn't know that, Facebook also owns Snapchat. So Facebook is actually buying up some of the smaller social media companies, and it's creating a monopoly. All right. So just want to make that appeal. In case you all didn't know, there is a new social media platform that's out, and I believe it's primarily for Black people, about Black people, and it's called, let me make sure I spell it right. I actually joined a couple of days ago, but it is run by Dr. Boyce Watkins, and it's got a weird kind of spelling to it. I think this might be right. It might have 2 F's on the end, but it's called Black Enough, but they spell it with 2 G's. Blag Enough. BLAGGENUF. Good morning, Lady Judy. It's called Blag Enough. And if you look it up at, I believe, blagenough.com, it runs on a mobile app. It runs through a mobile app. But a lot of African Americans are leaving Facebook. You know, they're using Facebook, but they're joining this social media platform that is run by us. Blag Enough. BLAGGENUF. And it might possibly have 2 F's on the end. All right. So if you're looking for a place to, if you're trying to figure out where some of the black people are going, this is where they're going. Just giving you a heads up. Because why? People are tired of being censored in a unfair way on Facebook. All right. People are tired of it. All right. You see all of this white supremacist stuff that is free floating around Facebook. And when you report it, it doesn't get removed, or Facebook will say it doesn't violate policy. But then if you post something positive about black people or something educational, or you talk about the injustices that are happening in this country, then that gets removed from Facebook and you can get put in Facebook jail. All right. I was put in Facebook jail a couple years back for like 48 hours because I posted an image of a black man doing his daughter's hair. All right. And somebody reported my image and said that it was racist. I was celebrating black fathers, and someone reported my image and said it was racist, and they put me in Facebook jail for 48 hours and I couldn't post anything. So these are things that are happening to people. And now it's more widespread and it's getting more attention. But Facebook has been doing that kind of stuff for years. Yes, for that. I was banned for 48 hours because somebody reported my image as racist. All right. But here's the thing. It's not our platform. That's the point. All right. So if you don't run it, if you don't run the platform, you don't make the rules for it. Got it? Good. All right. So I hope you all got this down. The platform is called Black Enough, BLAGGENUF. It might have 2 F's on the end. All right. But that is a new social media platform for black people to be able to talk and have the conversations that we need to have one with another without someone coming along and deciding that our conversation is too dangerous. All right. As far as I know, I've checked it out. I've been on it a couple days. There's nothing illegal going on on the platform. So I definitely wouldn't send anybody to a platform like that. But it is a platform where people are joining. They're having conversations around black business ownership, uniting as a community. What can we do to build each other up? How can we help each other economically? Those are the conversations that are going on. All right. Moving right along. We are back in our book, Heart and Soul. And we stopped at World War II, hard times in World War II. And we're going to read a couple of chapters today because I want to make sure I'm getting us through this book. And we're going all the way we're going to be talking about Black innovation, and Jim Crow is dying. But as we see, people want to resurrect Jim Crow. If we have time today, we're going to continue in This Is Our Land, and we're going to continue talking about Cuban immigration and communism, all right? Because that's the part that we were in this book. So I hope everybody is ready. Remember, we're trying to reach a goal on our Periscope platform of 1 million hearts. I don't know if I've hit it yet. I haven't been checking on it, but if we don't hit it today, we'll just keep going. All right. Hard times in World War II. I really like Kadir Nelson's images because he really gives you some very realistic imaging. All right. Very realistic imaging. And this is his portrayal of the times of black men being out of work. And I know right now in our economy, people are saying the unemployment rate is down. They need to put a asterisk there, and they need to say the unemployment rate is down for white people. Check the unemployment rates of black people in this country, and it's about double that of white Americans. It's not cool. All right. Most people know that crime and economics are tied together. When people have jobs, they don't have time to get into crime. So we keep talking about the crime issue, but we're not talking about the jobs issue. They go hand in hand. Hard times in World War II. Jackie Robinson, one of my ancestral descendants, said this: I learned that I was in two wars, one against the foreign enemy, the other against prejudice at home. E.G. McDonald, Private Company of the 71st Tank Battalion, said this: I love my America, and let somebody tell me it isn't mine. My Uncle Jesse had a farm down in Alabama with horses, cows, and chickens. He raised cotton and peanuts and also had a little patch of fruit and vegetables. Uncle Jesse and his family had made a good life for themselves out there in the country. Most of his neighbors were white people, but there were a few black farmers sprinkled about. He often had trouble with his white neighbors because they considered him competition. In the South, black folks had to be careful about doing too well. If they raised a better crop than their white neighbors, their crops and their mills could end up in flames. So when people say, I don't understand why the black community is not as far ahead as they need to be, they need to understand that black businesses and black farmers were being sabotaged all the way through. But we kept going. We just kept going. For a spell, there were quite a few black planters in the South, but that changed when the boll weevils came back. Folks like Uncle Jesse had to switch crops or move away to start over. Southerners still depended on the cotton industry, so they had some real hard times when the planters left. Most Northerners worked in factories, earning much more than Southerners, who still mostly lived in the countryside and worked on farms. Yes, rise no matter what. Thank you for the reminder. Very soon, things got even harder. On Thursday, October 24th, 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed. Only one day before, business was doing great, and the stocks were traded at higher prices than they had ever been before, which is why people are watching our markets and they're like, what's going on? All right. Economists who study markets and who study stock patterns and who study the history of the stock market keep cautioning us to not put so much hope and value in the stocks going up, right? Because they're looking at patterns, whereas we may be looking at something in the moment. But that Thursday, Americans could only watch as the stock market fell and stockbrokers panicked, selling the same stocks for pennies on the dollar. Banks, mines, and other businesses went bankrupt. Soon the country was plunged into a very bad economic time called the Great Depression. Millions of people lost every nickel they kept in the banks, and many more lost their jobs and then their homes. Black people were hit especially hard. Many were thrown off the land they worked and were forced to live in poverty. Some Southerners were able to keep their jobs because the cost of labor was much less than that up north, but their pay fell so low it still wasn't enough to live on. Millions of people were scared and hungry. Everywhere there were long food lines, and people in New York who lost their homes set up tents in the city parks. To make things worse, there was a drought in the Midwest. Crops dried up, and farmers were forced to abandon their land. People looked for help from the government, but the folks on Capitol Hill couldn't do much. The hard times lasted for about 10 years. All right? All the while, Adolf Hitler, the new leader of Germany, who had come to power in 1933, started making trouble in Europe. It was only the beginning of something bigger than anyone could have ever imagined. In the late 30s, a young black boxer by the name of Joe Louis fought a German fighter by the name of Max Schmeling. Hitler bragged that Schmeling was going to show the world how Germans were a supreme race by winning the fight. Hitler didn't care much for black people or anyone else who wasn't blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Lewis had lost to that young man 2 years before and hoped to fix things on this go-round. It grew into a really big thing, something closer to a huge political event rather than a boxing match. The eyes of the whole world were fixed on these two young men. All right, and this is his imagery of the young heavyweight boxer, Joe Louis. And I know I have some older people on here who probably remember when this fight happened. When the bell rang, Louis jumped out of his corner and beat that poor fellow into a pulp in a single round. So much for Supreme, honey. We celebrated, but deep down we all knew that it was just a boxing match. The real fight was much worse. We followed what was happening in Europe, listening to the radio and reading the papers. It was such a frightful thing. The Nazis had it in their minds to take over the whole world. And by the way, they still do, okay? They had taken over Germany by assassinating political leaders and then invading neighboring countries. By the middle of 1941, the Nazis had occupied much of Europe. Even worse, there were rumors that they were murdering the Jewish people by the thousands, shooting, starving, gassing, and burning people to death. America tried hard to stay out of it, but then on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Japanese planes flew over Hawaii and bombed our naval base at Pearl Harbor, killing thousands of our servicemen in a surprise attack. We couldn't stay out of it anymore. It was time to saddle up and fight. The next day, President Franklin Roosevelt declared war on Japan, and every person in America was behind him. Young men and women from every state signed up to serve in the war, and many more were drafted. Lord knows I couldn't go as I had to take care of my own children, but my two younger brothers went off to that war. Not that I wanted them to go, mind you. It was the hardest thing in the world, but I understood why they wanted to go and what they had been fighting for. So we gave them our blessing and prayed we'd live to see them come home. There were some white folks who thought that this was a white man's war and turned black folks away when they went to sign up. But we had just as much to lose as they did, maybe even more, considering the Nazis' feelings about us. Because if they took over the world, yeah, we weren't going to be in that other piece of the world that would have been spared. We would have been like the other 6 million people that were murdered along with the Jews. All right. So some black folks thought that the worst place in the world for a young black man was in the United States Army. And they were right to a point. Black soldiers were at the mercy of their white superiors, some of whom were Southerners who didn't like black people. They were segregated from white soldiers and sent to the front in battle or made to swab decks, cook, clean, and unload weapons from ships. That wasn't the service they signed up for. Some black soldiers didn't mind, but a lot of those young men signed up to fight, not to serve or clean up after white folks. White officers believed that black men weren't smart enough or brave enough to fight with the white soldiers or fly planes or drive tanks. But after we invaded Europe in the summer of 1944, and there's actually a movie based on this, the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, pushed President Roosevelt to put black soldiers in the fight. She had a good heart and was a great friend to black people and anyone who was in need. The military gave in, calling it an experiment. The Tuskegee Airmen, or the 332nd and the 761st Tank Battalion, were put into action. Now, I'm not bragging much, but our boys were some of the best combat soldiers and bomber escorts in the world. The 332nd pilots had the record for losing the fewest bomber planes in more than 200 missions and were so good at escorting and protecting them, they were specially requested for the job. Now, the downside of this is that many black men died protecting those planes, all right? So props to the Tuskegee Airmen, but also rest in peace to the Tuskegee Airmen that died, okay, protecting a country that still disrespected them. When most tank battalions lasted only 17 days on the battlefield, The 761st, an all-black unit, fought for 183 days straight, longer than any other battalion in the whole war. They helped win the Battle of the Bulge, and I'm proud to say that both of my brothers were right there with them, giving it to the Germans. But would you believe that after all the fighting they did for the country, the black soldiers were mostly ignored? White units got their medals during the war and were even commended by the president, while our soldiers weren't honored until several decades later. It didn't make sense. We had gone to war for our country to stop racist people from taking over the world. And yet at home, Jim Crow held us in his grip just as tightly as before. When the war was over, both of my brothers returned and saw that nothing had changed. They had been to places like France and England where black people were treated just the same as whites, and came home only to have to sit in the back of the bus. We figured if our soldiers were able to fight and defeat racism overseas, why couldn't we do it here? Their stories about equality in Europe let us know that this kind of thing was possible. It weighed heavy on our minds and pushed many of us to stand up again to fight for what we deserve. It was time to make things right. Jim Crow's days were numbered. Black innovation. Education is the key to unlock the golden door of freedom, said by George Washington Carver, inventor. You may have heard folks say that black people invented shoes. Love the imagery here. All right, he's got some of our famous inventors. All right, I see Madam C.J. Walker down at the bottom, George Washington Carver. Someone said that black people invented shoes, but that is not true. Everybody invented shoes. But it is true that in the 1880s, a black man named Ernest Matzeliger invented a machine that made the process of making shoes cheaper and faster. Matzeliger is one of many black folks whose ideas have made the lives of everyone in the world a whole lot better. Black people have been making inventions since slavery days, even before that, if we want to be honest. Plenty of very practical things that helped us to do the work we were forced to do. Africans invented new ways of fishing, of farming, basket weaving, ironsmithing, and since then we've invented ways of keeping food fresh with curing salts and refrigeration, lubricating engines, safely linking train cars, controlling traffic flow, improving light fixtures, helping firefighters breathe in smoke-filled rooms, and making supercomputers faster, among many other things. Everybody knows that we have created brilliant types of music like spirituals, jazz, blues, gospel, rock and roll, and country, and so on. That we have done very well in athletics. We know all about that even if we try to downplay it. But we've done so much more. Have you ever used an ironing board, sat in a folding chair, used a dustpan, ridden in a convertible or on a horse saddle, read an almanac, used a fountain pen that did not require dipping it into an inkwell, sat at a traffic light, seen a gas mask, used a golf tee, turned on an electric light bulb, eaten food in a delivery truck, used an ice cream scooper, gone to a blood bank, used a batting helmet or shin guards, or enjoyed potato chips. I'll bet you have. Most people don't know that all of those things were invented by or improved by black people. One of our finest inventors was a fellow named Elijah McCoy. Among many other useful things like the ironing board and lawn sprinkler, he invented a lubricating cup that oiled the gears of a train machine. Several people tried to copy his invention, but folks who knew quality only wanted the real McCoy. Another inventor, Lewis Latimer, improved on Edison's electric lamp by inventing a filament that could be produced much more cheaply. George Washington Carver was one of our most gifted inventors. He was a genius for making plants grow, he invented hundreds of products from soybeans, sweet potatoes, and peanuts, from soap to ink to synthetic rubber. Frederick M. Jones invented the portable X-ray machine and a refrigeration unit for food delivery trucks, ships, and airplanes. Dr. Charles Drew figured out how to separate blood cells from plasma to preserve blood longer than a week or so, which led to the creation of blood banks all over the world. Thank you, Black people. Yeah. Annie Malone and Madam C.J. Walker invented hair growing lotions that were so popular they made millions of dollars. Walker used her wealth to help with the movement to get the vote for women. Garrett Morgan invented the first automatic traffic signal. Granville Woods invented a train-to-train communication system. Otis Boykin invented a control device for guided missiles and computers, and the pacemaker. I could go on forever, but I've left out what is probably the most important idea ever introduced to America by the African American. It was brought to us by a young preacher from Georgia who used it to change the course of history. It was a tactic that he learned from Mahatma Gandhi, and Mahatma Gandhi learned from Jesus, who used it to free his people from India from British rule. The young preacher combined it with ideas from Scripture and America's Declaration of Independence to create a new message that spoke to all people, a message that had more power than any fist, gun, or bomb. If you ever take some time to read Gandhi's writings, he actually talks about how he developed the concept of nonviolence from Jesus's concept of love. This young man that we're talking about right now, though, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the idea was the peaceful protests. And here's his nice illustrated painting of a young MLK. Pretty nice. All right. Chapter 11, and we're going to stop at this chapter for today. Jim Crow's A-Dying. Very, very nice rendition, painting of Jackie Robinson at the beginning. Jim Crow's A-Dying. If America is to remain a first-class nation, it can no longer have second or third-class citizens. Third class added by me, quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I heard a story once about a black boy in the South who used to ride the city bus home from school every day. As was the custom, he sat in the back of the bus just behind the sign that split the bus into white and colored sections. One afternoon, a white kid got on the bus and sat right in front of the sign where the black boy was sitting. He stared at the young fellow and then at the sign back and forth for several stops, as if to taunt him. There was a door at the back of the bus, and when the bus pulled up to the next stop, the black boy grabbed the sign, stuck it in his satchel, and took off running down the street. The white kid yelled to the driver, "That boy stole the sign." The driver jumped off the bus and yelled at him to come back, but the young fellow hightailed it all the way home. He still has that sign, too. Now, it was not right for him to break the law, but just like many people in the South who were tired of Jim Crow laws, he felt that if the law says that you are less than equal to whites, then it is a bad law and it needs to be broken. Remember, all laws are not morally sound. After World War II, a young soldier named Jackie Robinson joined the Negro League baseball team in Kansas City. He played well enough to catch the eye of Branch Rickey, a part owner of the Major League Brooklyn Dodgers. Rickey was so impressed with Robinson, he hired him to play for his team despite the ban on black players. Jackie became the first black ball player to play in the major leagues since the 1880s. White folks in the ballpark harassed him for 2 years straight. White players pushed and spiked him, while white fans yelled and threatened him. But in spite of it all, Jackie played very well. He went on to be one of the best players in baseball and showed people that black folks were more than equals on and off the field. It was the beginning of a new day for baseball and for the country. Now, I told you that our country grew big and strong from slave labor, but it came of age by way of the Second World War. America came out of World War II, the strongest nation in the world, but in the South, Jim Crow was still the law of the land. Laws were supposed to make black and white folks separate but equal. But black people were only feeling the separation. While white folks generally had the best schools and supplies, black schools were shabby at best. And somebody would say, when did the change come? Because we look at some of our schools even today and we still see some of the same conditions. They had very few buses that worked. Black children were crowded at this point in time into one-room schools. Supplies were always short. Books were outdated leftovers from white schools. And in some places, high school wasn't even offered to black children because the local government felt they didn't need it. Nothing about the school system was equal. And if you look at what is happening with our current Secretary of Education, they're actually rolling us back to this time. I hope we all wake up. So, nothing about the school system was equal. We knew that the key to giving our children a chance in life was a good education, and the only way they could get it was if we fought for it. Now we have much more resources, and you don't have to beg people to educate your children. You now have the freedom to do things like homeschool. You now have the freedom to do things like online school, virtual school, homeschool co-ops, right? So you don't have to just be crying and complaining about how terrible your public school system is. You can actually do something about it, and you have some other options. So we began to struggle for truly free and equal education. Several Southern black parents began trying to put their children in the white public schools and were, of course, turned away. Reverend Brown from Kansas tried to send his little girl to the white school near their house in Topeka and was met with the same result. He sued the school board, and this brought us to the case in Kansas. I think it was Brown versus Board of Education, right? A lawyer with the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, took up the case and argued it before the Supreme Court, and he won. And black children gained the right to attend white public schools. When we gained the right to attend white public schools, there were lots of white people, especially Christians, who decided to take their children out of these public schools, and they were known as separatists. All right? And this is where the founding of many of our Christian private schools came out of. It came out of white people saying, now that the law has changed and we have to put our children in the same school as black people, rather than do that, we would rather pull our children out of public school entirely and create a Christian private school for our children only to be in that school. So if you have your child in a Christian private school, you might want to do some digging around in the history to maybe see if your school is one of those schools that was started in such a way. All right. So the law has changed. Technically, children have now gained the right to attend white public schools, but we know that the change did not happen overnight, right? Just because the law changed, it didn't mean that all of a sudden people fell in line with that. They just wanted to go to good schools like everybody else. Yes, so Christian private schools in the beginning became a cover for racism. Christian universities also became a cover for racism. Hello. Just do your history, all right? Do your research. Don't take my word for it. So, integrating schools at this time was very dangerous business, but children were brave. Every morning, all year long, children had to face angry crowds of shouting and spitting parents and were harassed by their classmates and teachers. Now, again, people think that this was just happening in the 50s and the 60s. But I, in the 90s, was still integrating my middle school. All right? So I actually went through some of this. I was integrating in South Florida at the magnet school. All right? We had an elementary magnet school in my ghetto neighborhood. And all of the white parents wanted that magnet school moved, that elementary magnet school moved out of our neighborhood because they didn't want to have to drive into the hood to take their children to school with us. And I often remember asking my mother, what was these people's problem? What was the problem? Why can't they go to school with us? That continued into middle school. In middle school, our magnet art school was located in the wealthy side of town. All right. And so if you were a magnet art student and you were continuing your magnet program from elementary to middle school, now you left the hood and you had to be bussed in to the middle school that was in the wealthy part of town. Well, they bussed us in, and on the first day, there were parents standing in front of the school with signs saying, "Go home. We don't want you here," etc., etc. We went to school that day. We got out of class and we were standing outside with everybody else waiting on our bus to come to take us back into the hood, and our buses never showed up. Yeah, our buses never showed up. So we wound up walking several miles from my middle school all the way back to the hood. Needless to say, that happened on the first day of school, and our parents pitched a fit, and it didn't happen again. But the reality is, I experienced it, I saw it, and I will never forget it. All right? So, just a little history for you there. People were still and are still, believe it or not, some of these school districts around the country are still dealing with Jim Crow laws and Jim Crow segregation, especially Midwest. In Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 black students were blocked from entering their new high school. President Eisenhower had to send armed troops to escort the children into the building. In Birmingham, Alabama, a preacher tried to enroll his children in a white school, and he and his wife were beaten. Hello, black Christians who think that your Christianity is going to shield you from racists. They were beaten up very badly. A few years later, the governor in Alabama himself stood in front of the door to a university to block black students from entering. Yes. Thank you, hubby. What kind of grown man would do such a thing? It took a very long time to get the schools to abide by the court's decision. Listen, it took a very long time to get schools to abide by the court's decision. So when people say they don't understand why we have to have protests and why we have to have marches, all right? Martin Luther King put it this way. He said, protests and marching make you visible, but you need more than that. You also need economic boycotting, and then you also need legislative action. All right. New laws. Thank you, Pastor. New laws with no teeth for enforcement. So yes, you have laws, but somebody also has to enforce those laws. Okay. Having the right to do something and being allowed to do it are two different things. One by one, segregated schools had to be sued to allow black children to enroll. So people didn't just roll over because the law was in place. Hello, we see that all over our country right now. Just because something is in place doesn't mean that it's being enforced. And this is why I try to get a lot of my white brothers and sisters to understand, because they're like, well, you have the freedoms now to do what you want to do. But if there's no enforcement behind the law, you still have the pushback. And still to this day, the schools still aren't all the way integrated. Why? Because of clever neighborhood zoning or lack of busing. All right? If I don't provide a bus to your neighborhood and your parents don't have a car, guess who's not going to that school? If I zone your neighborhood in such a way, because they know the demographics of a neighborhood, if I zone the neighborhood in such a way where I send half of the neighborhood goes to this school and it's all the white children and the white residents, and half of the neighborhood goes to this school and it's mostly the black residents, I've still created segregated schools. All right? And that is still happening across this country. Busing was a problem in Alabama too. In 1955 in Montgomery, a seamstress left work and headed home on a segregated bus late one afternoon. She took a seat at the front of the colored section of the bus. Now, if you can believe this, when a white fellow got on the bus, the driver told her to get up and give her seat to him. She was already sitting in the colored section of the bus when the white driver said, "You still have to give up your seat." Excuse me? Mrs. Rosa Parks said no. The driver came back raising a fuss, talking about how she had better get up or he called the police to come and arrest her. What's new? Like every other black person in America, Mrs. Parks was tired. Tired of being treated like a second-class citizen. She was sick and tired of giving up her seat to white people on buses. Sick and tired of being refused service in restaurants, in hospitals, department stores, hotels, having to buy second-rate food from the back doors of cafes, entering movie theaters from the rear, to sit in hot balconies to see a show. Sick and tired of being forced to drink from segregated water fountains when she shouldn't have to. Indeed, Mrs. Parks and millions more were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Miss Parks did not move for the white man on the bus and was arrested and sent to jail. Now, it could have ended there. When Miss Parks got out of jail, she could have just gone back to work. You see, she was not the first black person in Montgomery to be arrested for refusing to give up a seat on a bus to a white person. But she was very well known and respected in her community. She was a perfect example of the unfair treatment that black people were made to suffer in Montgomery and the rest of the South for that matter. Now, a little known fact was that this same incident happened to a 15-year-old girl. I think her name was, I don't want to get it wrong, I think it was Claudette. And they chose not to use her story because she was a young teenage mother. And they didn't want that fact of her being a young teenage mother to be held against her as a character assassination, to take away from the fact that she was being mistreated. So when this incident happened with Rosa Parks, they jumped on it because her reputation was well respected in the community, and they knew that the community would get behind her. All right. The community rallied around Mrs. Parks, and black leaders decided to organize a boycott for the buses in Montgomery. They chose a young preacher from Atlanta named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to lead the boycott. It was agreed that no black person in Montgomery would ride a bus on the following Monday. Can somebody hashtag no black person? Listen, when people say no black person, right? We're talking about no black man, no black woman, no black Christian, no black Muslim, no black person. So what happens when we make a decision, when we see injustices happening to all of us, regardless of our gender, our sexual orientation, our religious affiliation and faith, right? Back then, they didn't let those three things become a distraction from no black person getting on the bus. I hope y'all are hearing me. Because some of us will say, well, they're homosexual, so that's not my problem. Or some people will say, well, they're Muslim, so that's not my problem. Or some people will say, well, that's a woman's issue, so that's not my problem. Listen, it was agreed. I'm going to say it one more time for the people in the balcony. It was agreed that no black person in Montgomery would ride a bus on the following Monday. What did they understand that I would like this generation to get back to? What did they understand? They understood that they were being attacked primarily based on the color of their skin. You see, we can have debates about all the other stuff, right? We can have disagreements about all the other stuff at another time. But right now, when you realize that people want to do you harm and do people who look like you harm because of one thing, then you say, you know what? I might not agree with your sexual orientation, but you know what? They're coming against you as a human being. I might not agree. We might disagree theologically, but what I do agree on is the fact that you deserve to live in peace. You deserve to not have someone disregard your human rights. And this is what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were about to come together to work on a plan with the UN about black people's human rights. Okay? So when people's human rights are being violated, that begins to supersede the other details about our life or the other descriptors on our life. All right? So because they saw that everybody was being treated this way that was black, regardless of all the other descriptors attached to you, no black person in Montgomery rode the bus the following Monday. And come Monday, every bus in Montgomery was just about as empty as a poor man's pockets. Black folks boycotted the buses the next day, the next week, and the next month. Mostly black maids and washwomen rode the buses in Montgomery, and for months they either walked to work or they found rides with carpools, rain or shine. Without their business, the bus companies almost went bankrupt. The boycott continued through the winter and into the next year. Of course, the businesses and government in Montgomery fought the boycott tooth and nail. So of course, people are going to fight you when you start messing with their money. We get it. They even bombed Dr. King's house. But in the end, they had to surrender. Dr. King knew that if black folks held to the boycott and did not fight back with violence, but with a peaceful protest, they would be victorious. And on December 20th, 1956, 381 days after the boycott began, over a year, Dr. King called for the end of the boycott after the Supreme Court ruled that black folks all over America had the right to sit anywhere they wanted on the buses without any shouting. Get this, without any shouting, without any shooting, without any fighting, without any fussing. Black folks won a major battle for equality through nonviolent demonstrations. So don't let people convince you that you have to resort to violence in order to win. What we have to resort to is a thing called, and somebody on my YouTube said it several times, is a thing called UNITY. Again, I'm going to say this again for the people who don't follow me on Facebook. If black people in this country got together and said, God flip America, we got on one accord and we said, God flip America. We got on one accord and we said, enough is enough. It would stop. A lot of the stuff that we see would stop. But what is happening? We're letting people push you over here to this issue. Only the women's issues. Only the black women matter. Then we have people over here. Only the Christians, only the black Christians matter. Then we have people over here. We got to stand up for black gay rights. What is it doing? I'm just trying to help somebody understand how they got the victories that they got. All right? Because the overarching issue is human rights. Division. Exactly. And I'm just looking like, okay, Lord, when are we going to understand that divide and conquer is still being used? It's still being used. All right? So without any shouting, without any shooting, without any fighting, without any fussing, black people won a major battle for equality through nonviolent demonstrations. And the book says, glory, hallelujah. Oh, how we celebrated all over the country. It was a sweet victory. There would be setbacks and victories to come in the very near future, but we savored this one for quite some time. And now we are in a time where people are trying to legislatively roll back the rights that our ancestors fought for us to get. And because some of us seem to not understand that that is what's happening, we're involved in our own little rights battles. Okay? We all involved in our own little rights battles. Meanwhile, the enemy is gearing up to take away everybody's rights under the banner of civil rights. They're not just going to come for LGBTQ people. They're not just going to come for women. They're not just going to come and deal with Christians or Muslims. Everybody is going to be affected by these rollbacks. Everyone is being affected by these nominations. These people that are being nominated to hold certain positions that will be holding them for decades to come. Everybody's going to be affected by the Supreme Court. Lifetime positions. All right? So we need to understand that. And because we are running out of time today, I'm not going to go into the immigration piece today, but I will say this. Hashtag no black person. Somebody will say, well, I tend to disagree with what you're saying because, you know, as a believer, we need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Listen. If everybody is destroyed by the policies that are coming down the pipe, who are we going to be witnessing to? Please help me to understand. I look at what's happening in Jerusalem, right? And by the way, all of those Palestinians over there are not Islamic. They're not making a distinction between the Islamic Palestinians and the Christian Palestinians. They're shooting them all. All right. But again, if we say that we are for the lost, if we say that we are for the cause of Christ, please tell me who we're going to be witnessing to if everybody is blown up, if everybody is shot and murdered and destroyed. I'm just trying to figure this out. So are we spreading the gospel, or are we just for annihilating people in the name of whoever's God? All right. I just want us to think, because we say we're about the love of Christ and we're about God who saves the world, and we're about God who so loved the world, but we're not looking at the fact that people's lives are being destroyed. Okay? People's lives are being destroyed. The lives of the people that we say we're called to witness to, they're being destroyed, like they're being eliminated, like they're being wiped off the face of the earth. So who would we be bringing this gospel to if we're killing everybody? I need us to think. All right? I need us to think. The gospel of the kingdom. Who are we bringing it to if everybody is destroyed by legal policies? Who are we taking the gospel to? So again, no black person at that time. Of course, there were a few. I'm quite sure there were a few people who said, I'm not doing it. But the majority of black people understood that if we don't get a hold of our human rights, the right to exist, we're not going to exist to even be thinking about the other rights. Because our human rights are being violated. Our right to be a people, a right to be free, a right to be not considered 3/5 of a person. If we don't get that part right, there won't be a me that exists to even worship who I feel free to worship. If we don't deal with human rights, there won't be a person around to decide whether or not they want to worship God or not, because they won't be here. All right. So something to think about as we are championing all of these things and protections and all of that. Let's make sure that we don't forget the main one called human and civil rights. Again, I don't have to agree with your sexuality to know that you don't deserve to be murdered and slaughtered. I don't have to agree with your faith to know, common sense, that you don't deserve to be murdered for what you believe. Jesus is not saying, come to me and follow me, and if you don't, I'm going to slaughter you. That's not the gospel. Okay? Just want to make that clear. That's not the gospel. All right? And if we are trying to force people to our faith or force people to our position, that's not the gospel. That is something else posing as the gospel. All right? So, this has been another episode of Daring Dialogues. I have been your host. I pray that I have said something that was helpful to you. I hope that you will join us tomorrow for our Relationship Wednesday. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. YouTube, if you don't see the playback of this video, you can always go to our Periscope. All right. And that is located on my playlist. But also, let me give you the email as we go. Because I can't imagine this one staying up today on YouTube. So you can find me at pscp.tv/Life Nation, all one. With the love of God.